The dinner rush had just begun at Whitmore's Grill, one of the most popular restaurants in the city. Customers filled every table, waiters rushed between orders, and the smell of sizzling steaks floated through the air. To anyone watching, the place looked like a well-oiled machine. But that night, something unusual was about to happen. A man slowly rolled through the front door in a wheelchair. He wore simple clothes, a gray sweater, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. His hands trembled slightly as he pushed the wheels forward. The host at the entrance barely looked up. "Table for one," the man said quietly. The host sighed impatiently and pointed toward a small table in the corner near the restroom. "Over there." No smile, no greeting, no help. The man simply nodded and rolled himself to the table. What none of them knew was that the quiet man in the wheelchair was James Whitmore, the real owner of the restaurant. 4 years, James had built Whitmore's Grill from nothing. It started as a tiny diner with only 4 tables. Through hard work and determination, he turned it into a thriving business loved by customers. But lately, something had been bothering him. Customer complaints had started appearing online. Staff are rude. They ignore certain customers. Service depends on how you look. James couldn't believe it at first. The restaurant was supposed to treat everyone with respect. So he decided to find out the truth himself. Disguised as a disabled customer, he came to see how his staff really behaved when they thought no one important was watching. And the results shocked him. The first waiter approached his table after almost 15 minutes. He didn't greet James. Instead, he spoke while looking at his phone. "What do you want?" James smiled politely. "Could I please see the menu?" The waiter dropped the menu on the table without a word. As he walked away, James overheard him whisper to another waiter, "Great. Now I have to deal with the wheelchair guy." They both laughed. James felt a tight knot in his chest. Still, he stayed calm. A few minutes later, he ordered a simple meal, grilled chicken and water. But the service only got worse. Other customers who arrived later were served before him. One waitress even bumped his wheelchair without apologizing. At one point, 2 staff members stood near the counter whispering, "Why do people like that even come to fancy places like this?" One said quietly. "Yeah," the other replied. "He probably won't even tip." They both laughed again. James sat silently, listening to every word. Nearly 40 minutes later, his food finally arrived, cold. The waiter dropped the plate on the table. "Here." James looked up calmly. "Excuse me," he said politely. "The food seems cold. Could it be reheated?" The waiter rolled his eyes. "If you want it hot, you should have gone somewhere else," he muttered before walking away. At that moment, a young busboy nearby looked uncomfortable. He quietly approached James. "Sir, I'm really sorry," he whispered. "That's not how customers should be treated." James smiled at him kindly. "What's your name?" "Daniel." "Well, Daniel, thank you for being respectful." The young worker nodded and returned to clearing tables. But across the room, several staff members were still joking. One waitress whispered loudly enough for others to hear, "Maybe he thinks this place is a hospital cafeteria." More laughter. That was when James slowly reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small leather wallet. Inside it was something the entire staff would soon recognize. The owner's identification card. James carefully placed it on the table and called the waiter back. When the waiter returned, he looked irritated. "What now?" James calmly turned the card toward him. "My name," he said quietly, "is James Whitmore." The waiter frowned. "Okay, and I'm the owner of this restaurant." For a moment, the waiter stared in confusion. Then his face turned pale. The laughter across the room slowly stopped as other staff noticed what was happening. The manager rushed over. "Sir, is there a problem?" James looked around the restaurant. "Only one," he said. "You." The manager froze. James slowly stood up from the wheelchair. Gasps filled the room. Customers turned their heads. Staff members looked shocked. "You see," James continued calmly, "for the past hour I've been treated like a burden, ignored, laughed at, and served cold food. No one spoke. You didn't know who I was, he continued. And that's exactly the problem. He pointed toward the dining room. Every customer who walks through these doors deserves respect, not just the ones who look important. The staff lowered their heads in shame. Then James turned toward the young busboy. Except for one person. Daniel looked surprised. This young man was the only one who treated me with kindness tonight. The restaurant was completely silent. James looked back at the manager. Starting tomorrow, things will change here. Customer respect training begins immediately. He paused. And anyone who believes some customers deserve worse treatment than others will no longer work here. The message was clear. That night, several staff members were dismissed. Others were given one final chance to prove they could change. But Daniel's story ended differently. A week later, James called him into his office. "I've been watching your work," James said. "You understand something many people forget." Daniel looked nervous. "What's that, sir?" "Respect." James smiled. "I'd like to promote you to assistant floor supervisor." Daniel's eyes widened. "Really?" James nodded. "Because character matters more than experience." Months later, Whitmore's Grill became known not just for its food, but for something even more important: respect for every customer who walked through the door. And it all started with one night, when a restaurant owner pretended to be disabled.